There are many materials written on the next two important C's of leadership succession. So I will speed over the next two C's within one episode. Further, these two C's are often tied together. They are revealers of one another, like the tip of two icebergs, held in tandem. Work on one C often would lead to the revelation of the state of the other C. Principle 2 of leadership succession is the principle of character. Character is important. They are like, the pillars, as it were, that hold up a person's ministry. They hold up a person's life indeed. And many verses of the Bible speak of the character. For example, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have, as it were, crucified the sinful nature with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Character is developed, by keeping in step with the Spirit in our lives. It is a journey of walking and living through our lives for God to develop that character. I remember when I was a senior pastor at the age of 34 years old. Although I knew what to do to grow and develop the church, and the church did grow numerically over 2 to 3 years, I faced resistance from several quarters. It got so intense that my elder, who was a medical doctor, then diagnosed me to be on the verge of clinical depression. I just felt that the challenge then was too great and I cracked in my ability to lead. However, it was a time of God shaping my character. And a number of times God assured me that I was pleasing Him in my decisions to love people, to hold back on reactions, and to do what is good for the church. God said, "Philip, in this season you feel so down, but I see you as fruitful through your decisions." It was such an assurance from God. And personally, when I look back, it was a deeply needed lesson that shaped me for ministry for years to come. It was a season of walking step by step with the Spirit for God to shape my character. A friend of mine shared that he was a pastor of a difficult church situation for 2 years. It was tumultuous and it nearly broke him, but it taught him what being a pastor could really be like. And now posted to another church, he's a successful senior pastor of a growing and united congregation. Fruitfulness is ultimately seen by how a candidate responds to circumstances that shape his character. Ideally, the campus is a good place for a test of character. But what would we look out for in the 1 or 2 years of campus? I suggest to you to look for character development, to look for the candidate's response under deadline pressures, the candidate's response to conflict and disagreement, the response to authority, and the response in decisions for the good of the church ministry above self. If you see a crack in any of these fault lines that is observed in any of these areas, it may be helpful to validate the candidate's past ministry history even beyond the present season in order to validate if that is really a fault line. A pastor, when invited into the church, while was good at giving direction, began to show a lack of ability to guide implementation details. And this often frustrated the staff, who thought that he had come from previously a much bigger church and grown it so well that this would not have been a gap. After a couple of years of frustration, a discreet conversation with the pastors of the previous church revealed that this had always been a gap in that said pastor's style, but he had tried to gloss over it or cover it. In interviews, we often speak to referees who often share generalities, unless there is an outstanding gap. It is only when one is able to question a specific possible gap that a referee can validate or discount it. But let me emphasize that the validation of patterns is not to find a fault, but rather to raise awareness, counsel, and guide. A pastor I once known was caught for copying large chunks of sermons from the internet without ever acknowledging the sources and passing it as if it was his own. When called out by the elders, he was repentant. He made a commitment to change. He availed himself to be disciplined for it. Now that showed genuine teachability and growth. That's character. And that's really important in God's eyes. You know, I don't really do work in the kitchen much, but it's the place of hard work to produce good food. Similarly, to produce good spiritual food requires diligence and lots of hard work. The third principle of leadership succession is the principle of competence. You know, God called David to lead his people, and subsequently, David shepherded God's people with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands, he led them. Does the leadership candidate exhibit an earnest, almost ruthless evaluation of oneself to grow in competence and the skill to shepherd God's people? The Bible tells us, don't think that you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith that God has given to us. In His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. This attitude of a ruthless self-evaluation and growth inevitably leads to competence. Has the candidate exhibited this in the past and grown to the skill level appropriate to office within the reasonable time of given training? Now, what could we look out for? A number of things. We can look out for a past ministry record of milestones or noteworthy achievements. Now, this C is not just about faithfulness or steadfastness, but rather about achievements of leadership, growth and breakthrough in ministry, skills and goals. Now, we can look out for the ability to work with and raise high-performing teams. It is indeed a skill to hold different personalities together and bring the best out of them. We can look for the ability to decide the next developmental steps for the ministry. A key ability of leadership is to make decisions that give direction for that ministry. We can look for the ability to communicate and clarify clear thinking for the people. People can only lead if they can articulate vision and plans in a clear and compelling way to the teams and to the church. I would also submit to you that we should look for the ability to mentor and raise other leaders. When I was leading a ministry, I raised 2 leaders to succeed. One led for a while, then handed the ministry over to another because he was not coping well. The other not only led well, but went on to take on leadership of other sub-ministries as well. Now, why did one leader succeed so well, but the other did not? I wrestled with that to try to learn and grow how to raise and equip others. In the Bible, the New Testament pastoral leaders are almost always called to reproduce themselves in others to equip and raise others. Character and competence are tandem revealers of one another. Competence or character, when challenged by a situation or accusation, often leads to confrontation and re-examination. Now, it could result in a cover-up or honest ownership and self-reflection. Now, in such situations, not always but often, character is either through defensive denial, compromised, or through honest ownership, begin to shine as gold. Competence, either through cover-ups and giving of chances, may lead to stagnation, or through habits evaluated and changed to grow more robust. May our leadership successes grow in both character and competence to both excel and sustain the shepherding of God's people for the long haul.